So, welcome to the webinar, WAPES and the World of Public Employment Services. Today, we'll explore the Swedish labour market and the role of Arbetsförmedlingen, Sweden's public employment service. My name is Ulf Norman, and I have the pleasure to be your moderator today. And I've been seconded from Arbetsförmedlingen, the Swedish Public Employment Service, to WAPES Secretariat, and I'm here since October last year. Today, I'm assisted by Nicole Klobs from the German Public Employment Services. She's also seconded to the Secretariat. And of course, we have our translators with us also today. Nicole will help me taking care of your questions in the chat and making sure that all the technical aspects are working properly. So please don't hesitate to ask your questions in the chat function. Today's webinar Today's webinar, which will last until 2 o'clock Brussels time, will be conducted in English, and interpretation is available in French and Spanish. To choose your language, click on the globe in the menu bar at the bottom of the Zoom window and choose English or Spanish. Please note that the webinar is being recorded and that the recording will be made available to you all shortly after this webinar. As you can see, all microphones are muted and you will have the opportunity to ask questions after the presentation. However, you can use the chat facility to ask questions during the presentation. Questions that cannot be answered during the webinar will be dealt with at a later date and sent to all participants by email. But let's move on to the main speaker of the day. We are honored to welcome Mr. Sean Mendes, Director of International Affairs at Arbetsförmedlingen. Previously, he worked at the Swedish Council for Higher Education, at Vinnova, that's the Agency for Innovation, at the Ministry of Education and Research, and the Swedish National Agency for Education, Skolverket, as well as for the European Training Foundation in Turin. Prior to moving to Sweden in 2002, Sean worked as a political advisor in Canada before joining the public sector in British Columbia, where he worked with international trade, labor market policy and industry training. And Sean holds a bachelor's degree from Simon Fraser and Carleton University in Canada. And he has a master's degree from Stockholm University. But without further ado, I'd like to hand over to you virtually, Sean, for your presentation that we are looking forward to.
Thank you very much, Ulf, and many thanks as well to WAPES. I really enjoy actually attending the World of WAPES seminars, and it's really an honor to share with all of you today some insights about Arbetsförmedlingen, the Swedish Public Employment Service, and about the state of the Swedish labor market now. I can very briefly tell you a little bit about Arbetsförmedlingen. Large labor market agency in Sweden. We have about 11,000 employees and a budget of close to 8 or 9 billion euros. Our vision is to help employers and job seekers to find each other and to make Sweden richer by helping people and companies grow. I'm not able to control the slides today, so I'd ask that I guess it maybe Nicole can forward it. I can start with some fun facts about Sweden. Sweden is the third largest country in area, by area in the EU. The country's 50% covered by forests, and forestry, mining, and manufacturing have been strong traditional industries in Sweden, now more complemented by music, gaming, and the battery sectors, where Sweden is a global leader. The country has about 10.5 million inhabitants. The official language is Swedish, and we have 5 minority languages, including Finnish, meänkieli, which I believe is a Finnish-like language from the Tornio River Valley, Yiddish, Romani, and Sami. We rank 7th in the EU in terms of GDP per capita, about 42,400 in 2023, and that's about 20% higher than the EU average of 35,000. And I see in the chat someone has noted that, yes, I do share the name with a famous singer from Canada, actually, and I as well originally come from Canada. When he became famous initially, my social media was flooded until I actually gave away my Twitter name to the young singing Shawn Mendes. But I'm the social policy expert Shawn Mendes here in Stockholm, where I can tell you that it's a beautiful summer day, 23 degrees and sunny, so the whole country's in a good mood. Next slide, please. So at the core, Arbetsförmedlingen has its assignment from the Riksdag, the parliament, and from the government. And at the broadest level, our role is to improve the labor market by efficiently connecting those who are looking for work with those who are looking for skills or for labor. We also have a special assignment to prioritize those who are far removed from the labor market. Next. Some of the areas of responsibility that we have are to counter long-term unemployment, and there we work hard to strengthen support for the long-term unemployed, and especially those in socioeconomically vulnerable areas. We work a lot to support the integration of newcomers, to support the immigrants in Sweden to learn Swedish and to find employment as quickly as possible. We work with vocational rehabilitation, that is to help people with the reduced work capacity to get back to work. And we work very much compared to most countries to support people with disabilities in work and to increase the employment rate amongst people with disabilities. Next slide. I could very briefly just show you the organization. So we have a board of directors, which our director general reports to. We have a deputy director general, and the international division is actually in the director general's corporate offices. And then there are, as you see, a large agency with 11,000 employees in a number of other fields of areas and departments. Next. So what do we do? Well, we provide job seekers with support and coaching on their path towards employment, and we support employers to find their new employees. We offer our services where our clients are. It could be online, could be via chat, video meetings, telephone, but as well in our own offices and in the offices that we share with other government partners. We are Sweden's leading labor market experts, and we offer information, analyses, digital tools that support our clients. And we check that job seekers adhere to the regulations so that they receive the correct financial compensation from unemployment insurance funds and from the Swedish Social Insurance Agency. And as well, we procure labor market services from suppliers to quickly and efficiently get job seekers into work or into training. And I'll tell you a little bit more about this procurement. Next. So we primarily digital, but we of course have a local presence throughout the country. And as you probably know, Sweden's a quite long country and some of it is sparsely populated. We have 111 of our own local offices, 87 of which are permanently staffed, and 24 of which our staff travel to. We also have access to 142 government service centers, where we share centers with other government agencies in smaller municipalities. During 2024, we'll open a further 8 offices. A few years ago, we may have closed too few offices to reach people in the more isolated communities, and that's why we're opening a few more now. Next. In terms of our support to job seekers and employers, we have most of it divided into 2 fields of activity. one of which is called Field of Activity Direct. And that offers placement services to employers and job seekers throughout the country via digital channels and over the phone. We call it PDM, personal distance meeting. And the even larger field of activity is called local labor market. And that's responsible for designing and providing job placement services aimed at job seekers and employers. And this is delivered through all of our local offices throughout the country. Next slide. I can briefly tell you a little bit about Arbetsförmedlingen's strategy, digital first. And Sweden is a highly digital country, and therefore most of our services are managed digitally. Digitalization makes it easier for our clients to contact us, and it makes it easier for us to manage their cases. The service is provided not only on our website, which is open to all, but also through personal distance meeting. Last year in 2023, over 93% of registrations were done online. We also have local offices to provide more in-depth services to people and to those who do not have a high level of digital competency. Overall, we work in a very customer-driven model, needs-based environment, and that is independent of which channel we meet the client in. Next slide. I also promised to provide a short summary on a recent reform of Arbetsförmedlingen, of the Swedish Public Employment Service. The background to this is in 2019, we had a minority government where a minority supporting party very much wanted to see Arbetsförmedlingen provide more of its services through independent providers. So then we got an assignment from the government to provide more of our services through contracted independent providers rather than through the public agency. We do have a long experience of contracting out certain employment services on a smaller scale, and Sweden has this experience as well with this model for schooling. But we then started a larger trial with ESF funding called Prepare and Match. And this trial was then evaluated, and it allowed us to further refine the model where we contract out a larger proportion of our services. Factors that we work hard to achieve are fair competition between the contracted providers. We work hard to ensure that there's a provision of services throughout the country at local level. And we have also worked a lot and refined the compensation model. So it's the case where if a person is referred to a contracted provider, it's not a flat rate. The rate of compensation is based on how far the person is from the labor market, how difficult that client would be, how quickly they find work. So there's quite a large element of results-based model. Next slide. When reforming the Swedish Public Employment Service, we had support from the European Commission DG Reform through the Technical Support Instrument, which allowed us to contract the OECD, and they supported us with analysis reports and recommendations for the reform and with international insights. The overall goal was to create a fair, competitive, and inclusive market for employment services. To ensure that this design of the compensation model would somehow reward high quality service and quick service. And more recently, we've been working hard to include more social economy actors in local service provision, because so far it's been mainly private for profit companies, and we'd like to see more non-profit social economy actors, civil society actors provide services as well. Next slide. So how does the reform affect the work at Arbetsförmedlingen? Well, now we have more actors, and this places increased demands in terms of how we manage both our clients, who may be job seekers or employers looking for skills, and now quite a large procurement system to have independent providers. Overall, we think that we have been able to focus more on the client and on specialization of the service that we provide to job seekers. It's allowed us to hopefully do better follow-up of our clients and the results, and the compensation models that we've built and refined are putting, as I mentioned earlier, more and more emphasis on the results. We also work hard to ensure that there's equal service, so that a job seeker in Stockholm versus a small community 1,000 kilometers north of Stockholm should be able to access similar services. Some of the results that we want to achieve is more people achieve a sustainable livelihood and employment. We'd like to see employers gain better access to skills, and that we'd like to see state funds used in the right way. There is a very large evaluation of this new model being conducted now. The results will be published very soon, but I unfortunately do not have them now, nor have I seen them. So, but it will be very interesting to see how this new model of using contracted providers compares to using the more classic agency provided services. Next slide. So Arbetsförmedlingen, at the principle we have is that the needs of the individual are central. It's important to us that we always create value for our clients based on their individual situation. And we do this through all of our services and activities, and they're targeted at both job seekers and employers. As with this as a starting point, we've produced 7 value offers, 4 of which for job seekers and 3 for employers. And I see a question, do we have call centers? We have something called PDM, personal distance meeting, where people can access us digitally. It might be a bit misleading to call it call centers, but we have digital channels which people can access for our services. So call center-like, but a little different. Characteristics of the Swedish labor market at the broad level. The Swedish labor market is very much a tripartite system with collaborative policies and social welfare, a blend of flexibility and security. Many of you have heard of what many people talk about, the Danish model of flexicurity, and Sweden's is similar in many ways. The Swedish model is a model for inclusive and adaptable practices. It's traditionally been a model which is very friendly, even from the trade union perspective, to industrial transition and change. And the model has had a strong focus on lifelong learning. There are a number of key actors in the Swedish labor market, and they are, of course, employers and their organizations, trade unions and their peak level organizations, and of course the government, which sets a regulatory role, shapes policies, and balances the interests of both sides. But you would find that many areas of Sweden are actually devolved to the social partners. For example, minimum wages are not legislated by government, but are agreed in collective agreements. Next slide, and this is, I think, something important to share with all of you today. And it's something that you'll find throughout the Swedish labor market and education system, and that is this broad support for lifelong learning, which is widely available, usually publicly funded lifelong learning and upskilling through national, municipal, and civil society actors. So what are some of these actors? Obviously, you have Arbetsförmedlingen, the big national agency, as I mentioned, with about 11,000 employees, and we provide labor market training, validation, integration, support programs. But there's another very large actor in municipal adult education. Yeah, next slide I see in the chat. There we are, thank you. municipal adult education in Sweden, municipalities are required to provide compulsory school adult education to anyone who does not have a completed compulsory school, but they should also provide upper secondary education and upper secondary vocational education to everybody in the country. So there are tens of thousands of people every year, even hundreds of thousands, who participate in municipal to adult education, including vocationally oriented, which can look a lot like labor market training. We have a new model of post-secondary vocational training, which many people in Europe would call it about EQ, usually at EQF level 5 and even 6. And these are typically 1 and 2 year post-secondary vocational programs, which are fully demand driven. They may not be provided if employers do not certify that the skills are needed. So it's a dynamic model. There are no permanent provision, and it's as well fully funded with national funds, tuition free for learners. We have a new responsibility for higher education for lifelong learning, where higher education should provide shorter, more up and reskilling options. We as well have liberal adult education through folk high schools, study circles, and others, and employee transition support organizations. We have a national right to study leave. We have comparatively very high investment in in-company training. And most recently, about a year and a half ago, was launched the new transition study support. And this is another form which supports lifelong learning, where adults can do self-initiated study with national funding to upskill and reskill. And there's a very good question I see from my colleague at the ILO, Michael. The issue of coordination amongst all of these actors is actually on the agenda right now. I can as well mention that we use ESF plus funding for reskilling, upskilling, as many as you do. But we currently have an interagency working group on lifelong learning and skills. This has existed for 2 or 3 years, but in the last year or so, we once again have received support from DG Reform through the TSI Technical Support Instrument, and we have contracted the OECD again. So we've contracted the OECD to help us with our reform of the public employment service. Now we and other actors in Sweden are working with the OECD to look at skills governance in Sweden. And really the key here is to achieve better strategic coordination between all of these actors: public employment service, municipal adult education, post-secondary vet, higher education, liberal adult education, transition organizations, to ensure that the lifelong learning, upskilling and reskilling in Sweden is as impactful as possible. If I were to summarize on the central feature of the Swedish model, it is that everybody should be in the labor market. And in the next few slides, or in a few slides at least, I can show you some data which is evidence how important it is in Sweden for people to be in the labor market. Next slide. The role of municipalities, I think you now understand, in Sweden is very important because they provide a wide range of functions. They're responsible for schooling, for example, K-12 schooling, primary and upper secondary schooling in the country. Municipalities benefit if a high proportion of their population is employed. It impacts their taxation levels. And they often have activity in place to ensure that a high proportion of the population in municipality work. They have education and labor market divisions in municipalities to support this. And we work very closely with them to achieve some degree of strategic coordination and labor market support. We have local agreements and collaboration structure with the municipalities. And some of these national initiatives, such as the Adult Vet Initiative to Municipal Adult Education, are done through structured cooperation with us. There's a long history of cooperation and even more renewed focus on this cooperation in the aftermath of our reform. But I think there's still a lot of work to do, as one of the questions in the chat, I think, underscores that we need to improve our strategic coordination. Next, what challenges do we face in the Swedish labor market? Some of these ongoing challenges require strategic policies and collaborative efforts. In fact, all of them, I would say. One big challenge in Sweden is the integration of vulnerable groups, such as immigrants, people with disabilities. This is a large priority. Sweden has had some integration challenges over recent years. There were a large number who came during a short period of time in 2015, 2016. We now see employment rates increasing significantly amongst people who came as refugees a few years ago. So the things are moving in a good direction, but there's still lower employment rates among some foreign-born females, for example. We, like almost everyone here today, there are a few countries that don't suffer from this, but Sweden and many countries in Europe, North America, East Asia, Oceania suffer from an aging workforce. And this requires policies to encourage lifelong learning and flexible retirement options and age-inclusive workplaces. We also have the challenge at the societal level as well, at the agency level, of digital transition, and this requires even more reskilling so that workers can remain relevant and gain skills they need in the labor market. We as well link to aging workforce, but also due to sectoral developments, we face skill shortages, and some of these may threaten the economic competitiveness in Sweden. And finally, Sweden, like many countries here today, is highly impacted as a highly trade-dependent country by geopolitical events, war in Ukraine, and other pandemic that have impacted the world and the Swedish labor market. And safety nets during these economic downturns are essential components of the Swedish model to address global uncertainties. Next. So what opportunities do we see in the Swedish labor market? There are opportunities for improving growth and innovation in Sweden. There are lifelong learning initiatives and continuous skills development, and these are elements that are built into the Swedish model. The slide where I went through all of the actors involved in lifelong learning, I think gives you all a sense of how highly committed the country is to lifelong learning. And this is an opportunity, as we are able to, and we have a supply system to give people upskilling and reskilling. We are embracing technological advancements and fostering collaboration between humans and machines, and this will create new possibilities. We already see that AI is starting to impact in many areas. And finally, there's a broad commitment to sustainability, and this opens doors for green jobs and contributes to a resilient and future-oriented labor market. And we have a very specific example of the green transition in the north of Sweden, where we have green steel, battery manufacturing, tens of billions of euros in investments. However, we have skills and labor shortages in the north, and that really is challenging us in terms of needing to increase geographic mobility in Sweden, so people move from the south to the north and work there, also to attract people from other European countries. And some of those companies need as well to attract people from third countries to work and support the green transition in Sweden. Next slide. If I just, and now I just have a few statistics to end. Some numbers from 2023, we had 324,000 individuals registered as job seekers. 283,000 found employment in 2023. 43,000 continued to education and training. There were 1.74 million jobs registered in Platsbanken, our national job listings site at Arbetsförmedlingen. And we also in Sweden have a system where layoffs involving a larger number of people have to be coordinated, and which we call varsel, and there were 72,000 of these layoff notices that were served in 2023. And next slide, the last ones will show you a little bit about the one slide on our budget and then 3 slides on the Swedish labor market. So in 2023, we consumed about, if I use a PPP, about 7 billion euros. We also left quite over 1.5 billion euros back to the government, which we did not use. Main areas that the budget were used went to wage subsidies, activity support and development support, subsidies to unemployment insurance funds. The actual administrative budget for Arbetsförmedlingen was about 700 million euros in 2023. So that's the budget for paying staff and office costs. Next slide. This is a slide because we have a lot of international visits at Arbetsförmedlingen that many people find confusing. And I apologize as the countries are not fully in descending order because I updated these data myself very recently from Eurostat. And the order was set on the 2022. But you can see here as well that Sweden has an unexpectedly high rate of unemployment. In 2023, by the Eurostat standardized definition, 7.7% unemployment. And that puts us in unexpected company of Italy, Greece, France, and some other countries. The EU average was 6.1. But I think many of you are obviously labor market experts, and I myself am a labor market economist at the core, and I usually think, well, unemployment rate is one, but I'm actually more interested in labor market participation rates and employment rates as indicators on the strength of a labor market. So the next slide, you'll see the activity rate or the labor market participation rate. There, Sweden has actually the highest rate of labor market participation in Europe, a little bit above Estonia and the Netherlands, but really significantly higher than the EU average of 80%. And in fact, we do not have a labor market participation rate, which is similar to the countries that we have similar unemployment rate with. But in fact, we have a labor market participation rate, which is very similar to countries with very low rates of unemployment. So it's a rather unexpected picture here. And finally, I think the most important indicator of a labor market's health is the employment rate. Next slide. And here, once again, Sweden is not in the company of countries with high unemployment, but is instead in the company of countries with very low unemployment. So 82.6% of those aged 20 to 64 in Sweden, of all people in the country aged 20 to 64, were employed in 2023. I know in discussions with my colleagues in the Netherlands, a lot of their employed people are part-time working women, for example. In Sweden as well, we have some people with lower rates of employment intensity, and I would like to look more closely at these data. What I can tell you is that if you look at certain groups, you'll find that Sweden is even higher relative to other countries when we look at older workers. 55 plus, we're by far the highest rate of employment as well. Females, we have very high rate of employment. But overall, then what you see in Sweden is a country with a high unemployment rate, which is largely explained by the fact that we include a much higher proportion of people in the labor market than in most countries. We require that you be active in the labor market to receive most social benefits, which is not the case in all countries. And there are also cultural explanations where the value of work, the importance to support people to work, and the importance morally to contribute to work in Sweden is very, very high, as it is in some other countries in Northern Europe. And I think these are some of the factors that explain how we have such an extraordinarily high labor market participation and employment rate. It also partly explains why our unemployment rates are high, because we are including a broader swath of the population than in most countries. And the next slide is my final one, that just say our final sentence from Arbetsförmedlingen is, we make it possible for Sweden to continue moving forward. And with that, I thank you all for your patience as I spoke for maybe 34 minutes. And I hope there's some questions which I'd be happy to answer. I've seen some flashing in the chat, which have been hard for me to capture.
Yep. Thank you very much, Mr. Mendes, for this very interesting presentation. And as you have seen yourself, there are some questions in the chat. So I'm addressing my colleague Nicole. Please, could you find the first question for Mr. Mendes, for Sean, please?
Yes, definitely. Thank you so much, first of all, Sean. And we have really some interesting questions here in our chat. And I'm going to go with the first one. I've had to translate it from French into English, and I hope that this is mainly correct. And the first question I'm asking you is like, is Arbetsförmedlingen the main player in implementing national employment policy?
Yes, Arbetsförmedlingen is the agency which has the mandate to implement national employment policy. But as you've seen in the presentation, there are other actors such as the municipalities which play a role. But we are the largest, most strategic actor for employment policy in Sweden.
Thank you. Going to the next questions, and somebody has asked in the chat, what are your main sources of funding in Arbetsförmedlingen?
Well, state budget. So the vast majority of our funding comes from the Ministry of Employment, where we receive almost, let's say, 8 billion euros a year as a budget. And with that budget, we finance our 11,000 staff, all the offices, and the program support for labor market training, wage subsidies, subsidies to unemployment insurance funds. Then there's tiny bits of funding which might come through, for example, European funding. European Social Fund funding has, especially during and immediately after the pandemic, was quite significant, as in many other countries in Europe, in the EU. But vast majority from national government funding.
And then we also have a question here. Can you explain or elaborate a little bit more on the collaboration between the Swedish Public Employment Service, Arbetsförmedlingen, and the municipalities, Sean?
Yeah, this is an area which, and I saw there was a question in the chat asking about coordination between all the actors. And I think these two actors are especially large. There are, for example, when the national government earmarks funding to municipalities to deliver more vocationally oriented adult education, they are then required in their application to show that they have been working together with us and employers to ensure that the provision of vocationally oriented adult education meets labor market needs, and is not so much education supply approach, but reflects more labor market demand. So the municipalities are forced to cooperate with us to get their earmarked funds from the Ministry of Education. We as well have this national coordination group, which we call Myndighetssamverkan för livslångt lärande, so interagency coordination for lifelong learning. And this is an area where we've been putting a lot of emphasis in the last 2-3 years, and where we're working with the OECD, with the TSI funding from the DG Reform at the European Commission, to further develop strategic coordination, where these two actors are the key, the municipalities and the Public Employment Service, Arbetsförmedlingen.
Thank you so much, Sean, for answering also this question. There is another interesting question, and I see that there's still some questions are coming in. However, if we're not able to answer all of these questions, we'll do that later in a written form. But there's a question asking about what is the status, or which are the organizations that provide the transition into the employment from being an unemployed person into becoming an employed person, is there any vocational training center? Are you outsourcing? Are you working with private companies, or are you just doing that by your own with the counseling services? How are you doing in Arbetsförmedlingen?
I could answer that with yes, 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 yes. We do provide, here I can provide some insight. So under our new model, which we developed in the recent years, we roughly categorize job seekers into roughly 5 categories. So those, if we want to call them category 1, those who are closest to the labor market. So more or less everyone at the seminar today is probably category 1. There are people who would just register with us and apply for jobs using their contacts and their channels. And then we have category 5, those who would be furthest from the labor market. They might not speak Swedish or English. They might not have a completed upper secondary education, or perhaps not even a compulsory education. They may not even be able to read or write. These people we deem to be so far from the labor market that they have to come to us, where they'll receive intense support from Arbetsförmedling staff. Then those in the middle, groups 2, 3, and 4, we now refer to private providers. And all of the, when we refer these people to private providers into overall service we call prepare and match, then they receive services according to their needs. So those who are closest to the labor market would receive less intense service. Those who are further from the labor market would receive more intense service. And the funding mechanism to these private providers varies. So when they take a client, if Nicole is a client who's deemed to be very close and Ulf is a client deemed to be further, the provider will receive twice as much funding from us to work with Ulf, to find him work or to get him into the labor market than they'd receive for the client who's closer to the labor market. Now, I don't remember the original question, but I think I answered some of the question, I hope.
No, yes, definitely. You answered the whole question, and whatever we mentioned is not totally answered. Will be written also later, and we'll send it also.
I can also add here. I mean, in addition to the municipal adult education and Arbetsförmedlingen, also people who have permanent contracts when they become unemployed usually go first to their transitions organization, which is funded partly through agreements with the social partners, and that's a typically very high level of active labor market policy support for people with permanent contracts and collective agreements. And these are, of course, people who are typically not unemployed. But so there are a number of different channels which can be provided by different actors.
Mm-hmm. Going from the customer view a little bit into the employer view, we have also some questions how you deal with employers and their needs. So there's one interesting question. What is the level of satisfaction of employers with your PES services, or what types of employers use PES service the most?
Here, I'm sharing with you my personal opinion or feeling, and I think it's an area where we have work to do at Arbetsförmedlingen. And this is I've worked here now for almost 2 years, and it's an area where many people think we need to be better in tune with the needs of employers, especially as we move now from several decades where we've mainly had the challenge of a lot of unemployment, and we're now moving into probably several decades due to demographic change, where the main challenge for us will be skills and labor shortages. And I think as we move into an era with more skills and labor shortages, we're going to have to be better at understanding the needs of employers, better at helping employers find people, better at helping employers get people to move to parts of the countries where they need to access skills and people. So I'd say the level of satisfaction of employers with PES services is not as high as we'd like it to be.
And you talked about also the segmentation for unemployed persons, and like some of them are closer to the labor market, some are a little bit further away, and how you counsel them and provide services to them. Then do you do that also in some kind of way with employers, or is that a totally different thing?
I'm not aware of us categorizing employers into different groups, but certainly we do customize how we work with employers according to their needs. So we don't treat all employers the same. We have a special office in the north of Sweden supporting employers working with the green transition. And there we work in innovative ways to help them gain access to skills and people. So the employers are not categorized, but we certainly do not treat all employers the same. We try to meet their needs based on their situation.
Yeah, you talked about the green jobs, as you mentioned. There's also a question in the chat. Somebody asked that you have elaborated on this. If you could tell a little bit more in concrete terms, or is that something where you would have to deep a little bit further, or what levers are you using to encourage job creation in the green job area?
Well, here actually I have I've worked quite a bit with a special office. We've created the north of Sweden an office in the town of Skellefteå, which is really at the center of the green transition, a town with a large battery manufacturing facility. And there are other towns in the regions of the north building green steel and so on. And there we've have specialized services to support green transition. Some of them are using ESF funding to allow people to move to the far north to test what it's like to live there and test those green jobs. We've offered a lot of tailored and customized reskilling and upskilling for unemployed people to gain the green skills. They might move from automotive manufacturing for internal combustion engines to working in a battery manufacturing facility. So they have some core manufacturing facility skills, but they need some new skills. So we've used a lot of tools from validation, labor market training, relocation grants, interview support to support the green transition. And it's been intense work, and we're still, despite all our efforts, finding it difficult for employers in the north to get access to everybody that they need.
Thank you very much, Sean, and thank you, Nicole. I have, I think that will be the actually the last question, but you mentioned that you had shortages in some sectors, and do you, I mean, Arbetsförmedlingen or Sweden, are you looking to forge partnership with other countries, like, I don't know, for example, Senegal, in this question, in the context of circular migration?
Well, that's a fascinating and interesting question, Ulf. If I, as a labor market economist, look at demographic trends, I see that it is unlikely that Sweden will be able to meet its labor market needs with people who are in Sweden right now. Then our first move should be to recruit people and attract people from within the European Union and other participating countries in the common area. But the problem is that many countries there also are in this difficult demographic situation. Too many people aging out of the workforce, too few people entering the workforce that are young. So we do see that Sweden works to recruit skilled migrants from third country. As in many countries in Europe, this has been a politically sensitive topic in recent years, but employers are very, very clear to the government that we must have access to the skills we need to grow and to contribute to Sweden's growth and competitiveness. Arbetsförmedlingen does not have a role in this. It's the migration agency, Migrationsverket, and employers. So my answer there is that I think that we'll see many of the emerging sectors in Sweden to continue to rely on attracting some of their skilled talent from third country. We know that the IT sector has had a heavy reliance on India, for example, and a country such as Senegal or some of the countries in Africa where they actually do have a lot of young people, I can imagine being increasingly important in the coming years. It'll be up to employers to tell us what they need, and then they will do what they need to do for recruitment if we cannot help them with people who are in Sweden or in Europe.
Yeah, I mean, I was thinking of the situation in the northern part of Sweden, where we have, for example, the battery factory needing a lot of labor, and also the green steel industry. And because there's just one last question also on green jobs. Could you say something more about the green jobs and what are the leverage to how do you say, give incentives to creation of jobs in the green sector?
Okay, I can quickly, before I answer that, Ulf, I can say that we are exploring opportunities through the EU instrument talent partnerships. And there, Arbetsförmedlingen is working with the Association of Employers of Northern Sweden to look at specific occupations where they're unable to meet their skills needs and where we might enter a talent partnership with a participating country. And countries that are participating in talent partnerships right now are Morocco, Tunisia, Egypt, I believe Bangladesh, Pakistan, perhaps Senegal, Nigeria. In any case, it's a growing number of countries, and there, through an EU instrument, we may help employers to work with this instrument to meet their skills needs. In terms of incentives for the green, I mean, Sweden has traditionally not been a country to use heavy incentives to support green industrial development, such as, for example, the US. But we have instead put most of our work into the skills issue, which should be interesting for everybody here today, because that's what a public employment service does. So we provide publicly financed reskilling, upskilling, labor market training, validation. So we don't use industrial subsidies much at all in Sweden, but compared to most countries, we invest very heavily in the skills of people. And that's, I think, where the main focus in Swedish industrial policy has been, to ensure that we provide the skills that people need to contribute to the green transition. And to some extent, infrastructural issues around access to CO2-free energy.
Great. Thank you very much. So that was the last question for this time. Thank you very much, everyone, for all your questions. Our colleagues from Arbetsförmedlingen will be answering all the questions that we received in the chat, and they will be sent out to you together with a link to the recording of this webinar. And of course, the presentation will be made available as well. And all the information will also be available on WAPE's website, of course, at wapes.org. So thank you for taking part of this webinar organized by WAPES. And we had the opportunity to discover the Swedish labour market today and the role of Arbetsförmedlingen, and thanks to Sean Mendes. I'd like to warmly thank you, Sean, for your participation and for the frank answers to all the questions. I'd also like to thank Nicole for her assistance today, and of course to the translators for their excellent work. And to you participants, thank you very much for all your pertinent questions. I hope you enjoyed this webinar and that you learned something useful. And before we leave, I would like to invite you to complete a satisfaction survey that will come automatically when this meeting ends. It's really important to get your opinion and suggestions in order to even better improve this series of webinars. I would also like to invite you to join us for the next webinars that we'll be organizing in the near future. The next one will be the 12th of June, and then we'll be presenting the Austrian Public Employment Service, AMS. You find all the information on wapes.org, and you can register for the seminar already today. So thank you very much for today. Hope to see you soon again, and have a lovely day. Thank you very much.
Thank you, everyone. Hope to see you in the real life somewhere soon. Bye-bye.
Bye-bye.
Thank you.